guys some pictures of myself throughout the years, hopefully to like help you connect a little bit to who I was when I was your age and who I am now. So this is a picture of me in high school. And this picture is actually the day of, I think, my junior prom. So that was fun. And then here's a picture of me in undergrad. This is actually a picture of me in Italy when I was on a study abroad. Here I am in this picture sort of early on in my grad school years. This is one of my really good friends from when I was really young, and she came out and we went to Napa. So that was fun. And then this is a picture I think that was taken last year. So this picture, grad school is a very long time, which you'll get to understand more through my talk. So this picture was taken about 4 years ago. And then this picture was, I'm still in grad school, obviously. And this picture was just taken last year at the Winchester Mystery House, which maybe a few of you have been to, with another one of my good friends from college. Okay, so I'm going to start by just describing my journey and how I went from being this high school student to a PhD student now. Oops. Okay, great. So I grew up in a place called Granby, Colorado. It's a very small town in sort of in the mountains in Colorado. It's kind of close to Rocky Mountain National Park. I went to a really small high school, so that's probably different actually than the experience that a lot of you guys have. There was only 100 people in my graduating class. You know, there was only even the opportunity to take 3 AP classes. So I took all of them, but that was sort of all I could do. Also in high school, I was really into sports. So I played a lot of soccer. And we actually had a ski team at my high school, of course, because this was in the mountains. So I did some Nordic skiing in high school as well. Okay, so just to give you guys some context that I think would be useful for you going forward. When I was in high school, I was a pretty good student. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I liked all really subjects pretty much. But I think I particularly like science. And my parents are both in the medical field, sort of broadly. My mom is a physical therapist and my dad is a pharmacist. And because I did pretty well in school, I thought that it would be fun to be a doctor. And also because I did pretty well in school, I thought that I should apply to a lot of really good schools and see what happened. And interestingly, I did not get into any of those schools. So if anybody wants to talk about that, I'd be happy to talk more. But I basically ended up going to my fallback school, which was the University of Colorado at Boulder. It's the state school in my state. That's not to say it's a bad school by any means. It's an excellent school. I was really lucky to get in, and I had an amazing time there, actually. I think at the end of the day, sometimes things seem to happen for a reason, at least, and I sort of left my heart in Boulder because it's like my favorite town. I loved living there. I loved my undergraduate experience. As far as career-wise and development-wise, I came in to CU Boulder thinking that I really wanted to be a doctor still. And so in undergrad, most schools have pre-med advisors, so advisors specifically that can help you prepare for med school. And I went to one of my pre-med advisors and talked about some of the things I liked. And she was like, oh, well, it seems like you really like science. One thing you could do is consider trying to work in a lab and see how you feel about that. And also shadowing a doctor is something you should do. So I tried both of those things when I was a freshman in college. I shadowed an orthopedic surgeon who actually my grandma had like a personal connection to. She connected me to him. I shadowed him, and at the same time, I started working in a lab. And I was comparing and contrasting those two experiences because I was doing them at the same time. And I just immediately gravitated more towards working in the lab. For me, the big difference was that working in a lab, all the time you're working on something that is completely new, that nobody has ever figured out how to do before. And you're always being challenged, And you actually learn through failure a lot. So a lot of the times things don't work out the way that you expect them to. And that's what I really liked. If you're a doctor, it's kind of the opposite experience, right? Like you can't mess up. You have to make sure that everything you do is exactly right all the time. And because of that, it means that you see a lot of the same types of things over and over again, just because that's your expertise, right? Like you see the same things over and over again because you have to see the same things over and over again to be perfect, never make mistakes, get everything right all the time. So that's sort of what led me down the path of science. And because I was working in a lab, I was also working with graduate students who are getting their PhD who are also in the lab. And that's how I got led down this path of going towards getting a PhD. So it turns out that I really excelled in lab. I really liked it. The advisor or professor who I was working for in the lab was really impressed with my work, and he wrote me a nice recommendation. I got decent grades in my class and stuff, and that is what led me eventually to apply for grad school. So straight out of undergrad, I applied for grad school and ended up getting in at Stanford, as all of you know. And so that has been really fun. I started here in fall of 2014, and I should finish in probably December of this year is the plan. So let me tell you a little bit more about grad school, because that is the experience that I have and could be something that may be of interest in your future, especially if you want to do science. Okay, so what is grad school? When I say grad school, what do I mean? There are kind of three categories of grad school. There's a master's, professional school, and PhD. So we don't have to go through everything in this table, but I just wanted to lay it out so that you guys understand the differences between these things. So in a master's degree, you either are going to get an MS or MA, Master of Science, Master of Arts. That just basically depends on your school and what degree they tend to award for which majors. If you went to professional school, you would get a medical degree, like a medical doctor, a JD, which is for lawyers, MBA, which is for like business people who want to be CEOs, PharmD if you wanted to be a pharmacist, and there are multiple others, professional schools. For a PhD, this could be in basically any field, but at the end of the day, you'll be awarded a PhD. Okay, so if you do a master's, this typically will take 1 to 2 years. Some people take longer. A lot of people do master's degrees later in their career, maybe over online or at night school. So with professional school, depending on which school you choose, obviously, there's a very set timeline of 2 to 4+ years, just depending on which degree you're choosing. And for a PhD, it's a lot more flexible. So the shortest is generally 4 years, and then I write to 6+ years. So the average for most people, it would take 5.5 years, depending on your program. But some people take longer, and there's nothing wrong with that by any means. So in a master's or professional school, you're primarily just working in classes. And in professional school, obviously, you'd have some professional training as well. So if you're going to be a doctor, they'll teach you how to do doctor stuff. The difference between those two things and a PhD is that in the PhD, mostly you are not doing courses. Mostly what I'm working on a day-to-day basis is what's called my thesis project. So that's sort of my original research that I'm going to present to finish my thesis. I'll describe that more in a minute. So why would people get a specific degree? So if it's a master's degree, people will do this basically to get additional expertise, and that could have a few different benefits. First is most of the time it would increase your salary. If you got your BA, your undergrad degree, in something else, and you wanted to enter a new career field, a master's degree would be a good way to do that. So for example, I have a friend who got her undergrad degree in Spanish, but she really wanted to become a teacher. She decided that later in life. So now she just finished a master's degree in education. For professional school, obviously the reason you would choose that is specifically if you wanted to do one of the careers that professional school is for. But for a PhD, it's really different. So the goal in a PhD is just to become an absolute expert in a certain field. So my thesis project is the area where I am an expert. So if, for example, the disease that I'm working on, there was a time where somebody actually called me up and was like, hey, I want to pay you money to talk to me about this particular disease because they were working in business and they had a question about my disease. So I'm an expert in my field in that I know basically everything there is to possibly know about my particular area that I research. And the other skill that you learn in any PhD is how to independently problem solve. So the goal of a PhD is to become a truly independent researcher, so you can discover knowledge basically completely on your own. So the cost of each of these things, I wanted to highlight this because it's relevant. In a master's program, of course, that's just going to depend on the program and the length of the program. Professional schools generally are quite expensive, depending on which school it is, but often 100K plus. And what's cool about a PhD is that what people may not realize is that it's generally free. And not only is it free, they pay me for teaching and research work. So basically, I actually am bringing value to the university because I'm doing some of the teaching for the undergrad classes, and all the work that I do for my thesis project is research work. And that brings value to the university as well because I'm actually doing research that will reflect well on the university. So they pay me to do that. Okay. So what is this thesis project? What is my goal in graduate school? So I guess I thought the best way to explain this is just to explain at a very broad level what my thesis project is, and maybe that'll give you some insight into what these can be like. Okay, so is this gonna work? Yes, okay. So in what I'm showing here is, this is a normal heart up here. This is a picture of a cross section, and this is a echocardiogram, just a video of a heart that's actually moving in a person. And then the disease that I work on is called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and that's this lower heart down here. So what you can see in this heart is that this is the left ventricle right here. So that's where all the blood from your body or from your heart gets pumped all the way out into your body. And what you can see is that the muscle is really big and thick through here, right? So this is what the muscle tissue normally looks like. And in a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or we could sometimes just call it enlarged hearts, then the muscle can get really thick. And you can kind of see in this video, so you can see the thick left ventricle right here. And what happens is there's less space inside of the ventricular cavity, so less blood can get pumped into the body. So my goal is to understand how genetic mutations, so things that you would like inherit from your parents, end up causing this disease that has enlarged hearts. So how that works is, just breaking this down into smaller components. Inside of the heart is the heart muscle is muscle cells, right? And this is actually a 3D image of a muscle cell, and the stripes are different kinds of proteins that are labeled with different colors. And if you look at each individual stripe, those stripes are called sarcomeres. And within a sarcomere basically are some different proteins, and what happens is these two ends of the sarcomere come closer together, and that's what causes muscles to move. So zooming in just a little bit more, this gray stuff right here is called myosin, and these things that, oops, sorry, go back one, there we go. These things that stick out are the myosin heads. And so they grab onto this blue thing, which is called actin, and kind of pull it closer together. And so there are mutations in these myosin that end up leading to the enlarged heart. So because I'm a biochemist, that means I work on the molecules themselves. Myosin is a molecule, a protein molecule, and when it has mutations in it, that is what leads to the enlarged hearts. So my job is to just look at these individual myosin molecules and ask what's different if the myosin is mutated versus if it's in its normal healthy state. And so that is what my thesis project is on. I have like a handful of different mutations that lead to enlarged hearts, and I'm just looking at the individual molecules, what makes those molecules different if they have mutations versus if they don't. Okay, so I wanted to demystify a little bit what scientists do all day, because that's what I currently would call myself as a scientist. So you could understand what you might do if you were to choose to go to graduate school and or continue on to become a scientist. So this is actually my schedule from this week. So I thought I'd share a little bit about what this week looks like for me. Okay, so Sunday mornings, I tend to sleep in. I spent most of the day Sunday relaxing. I went on a little hike. I went out to dinner with my friends. It's pretty common in graduate school. I had to drop into lab just a little bit yesterday, on Sunday, to do a little bit of work because I have cells that are growing that I have to take care of, and they don't care if it's the weekend or if it's a weekday. They need to be fed. So I go in on the weekend sometimes and feed them. And sometimes if I'm really busy, I'll actually do more work than just feeding my cells on the weekend. On Monday morning, I usually first thing in the morning get up and answer some emails because there's a lot of emails that come in over the weekend that need to be answered. I had a meeting on Monday morning, and then I spent the rest of the day in lab. And you'll see on my schedule, it normally goes, so this would be starting at 8 p.m. So I finish things at about 9 p.m. That's pretty normal for me. Sometimes I'll finish a little bit earlier, but I do tend to work fairly late. And part of that is because I am not a morning person, so my mornings usually don't start until 9:30 or 10. But yeah, if you go to grad school, this is fairly normal, is that you should expect to work 10-hour days or so. But what's different than, for example, high school is that once I finish work at the end of the day, I don't really have homework or anything unless I really want to. So at 9 p.m., I get to go home, I make dinner, I relax, I watch a few shows, but I don't generally have work to do. Now, Tuesday was actually a notable deviation from that. So I spent the morning in lab, but then you can see on Wednesday morning, I had group meeting, which just means all of the people who are in my lab group got together and we had a meeting. And we rotate between who has to actually present their work, what they've been doing for the last few weeks. So I stayed up late on Tuesday night, working on analyzing some data and putting together some slides so that I could share with everybody what I was doing on Wednesday morning. So I stayed up pretty late that night, like till 11:30 or midnight. So what's really cool is that since I get to set my own schedule, and this is very common in your PhD, is that no one will tell you when you have to be working and when you don't work. I actually just took a long lunch and took a nap after group meeting. So I felt a little bit more well-rested after that. I spent some more time in lab, and I had a couple meetings, and you'll see I have meetings sort of spread out throughout my schedule. That's pretty common for me. I do a lot of work on different teams, and so these meetings tend to be team meetings for either my side projects, like my student groups, or for other career development or things like that. Okay, on Thursday morning, this is a little bit different than normal. So because we're in times of COVID, I can't go to lab all of the time. We only have a limited number of people who can be in lab. So I stayed home Thursday morning and did some data analysis. I read some different scientific studies. I did a little bit of work writing. Normally, I would probably do this while being in lab or potentially being at the library, but because of COVID, I had to stay home. And I worked in lab, had another meeting. On Friday, I worked in lab, had meetings, and then at the end of the day, I ended a little bit early that day, and we had got together with a few other people who work in my department, and we had a little happy hour. So this morning I had a little meeting. I don't always have meetings on Saturday, but today I did. And then I spent most of the afternoon relaxing and preparing for this lecture, putting all of the schedule stuff together. Then I have my lecture, so I do often have some kind of outreach thing most weeks. And then tonight I'm spending some time with friends again. Okay, so I hope that clarifies a little bit what I do as a graduate student. Just to be clear, I'd be happy to answer. So, the biggest blocks of time here are lab. And that's a very nebulous concept, I understand. So lab work is it's a lot more hands-on than you would imagine. When I'm in lab, I'm spending all the time pipetting and making gels and walking around and getting different reagents. It is actually pretty close to what you would do in a lab class, except instead of doing that for 3 hours, you just extend that for the whole day. There's a lot of waiting for things to happen. And during that time, I'll answer emails or honestly just look at Facebook and wait around. So that's what I'm doing when I'm in lab. So if you like to work with your hands, actually, lab work can be really fun. So going forward, though, I think I have really enjoyed my PhD experience. But something that I have realized is that what I really like is the mental work that I have to do when I'm doing my PhD. I don't necessarily like the physical work as much when I'm, actively doing this lab work stuff. I won't get the data until the very end, right? So I spent all day working this day and all day working this day just to get a little bit of data that I analyzed here. So it's a lot of, it's just a lot more hands-on than I want to do forever. So it's one thing, I guess, to want to do this thing right now. And I have no problem with that. I love doing lab work right now, but it's a different question to say, do I want to do that forever? And I kind of realized in the last couple of years that I don't want to pipette forever. That's not a bad thing. There are lots of my friends who do, and they're going to go on either to stay at the university level and keep working in labs, or go to the biotech industry and keep working in labs there. But for me, I want to move on to something else. So I am applying for jobs right now in consulting, which is, again, a very nebulous idea. But the basic idea is that I will take the problem-solving skills that I learned in my PhD and apply those to business problems. So consulting is when a business has a very specific problem and they don't know how to solve it. And so they come to a consulting firm and ask them, how should we solve this problem? So there can be all kinds of different problems. For example, in a biotech industry, some company might come to a consulting firm and say, we have this drug that we think could potentially help people. How should we put it through clinical trials? Or it could be completely distal. It could be, we're a paper company and we need to know how to maximize the use of our different factories for paper. But either way, the skills that I've learned in my PhD in terms of how to solve problems, especially problems that I've never seen before, will be useful to me, hopefully, as I continue on in business. And I think that combines a lot of the intellectual parts that I really like about my PhD, and kind of removes a lot of the waiting and pipetting and all of that stuff that isn't, I wouldn't say, doesn't excite me as much.